Well, hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Bland, and I'm so excited about this interview that you're going to experience in a moment that I did with Dan Buettner, the father of the Blue Zones concept. And, we really, I thought, had a tremendous opportunity to explore a little bit in greater depth the concept of why these long-lived populations end up with their longevity because of the way that they're eating and living, and kind of news to use and insights into that whole concept. So I think you're going to value greatly from Dan Buettner Unplugged in this discussion that we had, and I feel very privileged to share it with you.
Well, here we are. Sometimes in your life you're just very fortunate to meet a person that kind of changes your whole worldview, and that's the experience I had with Dan Buettner. I first experienced it reading his book, Blue Zones, but then meeting him was kind of the cherry on the top. This is a remarkable person, remarkable personality. And, I've been in this field for 50 years. So it's not without some experience that I've had in meeting remarkable people over the years in this field. And Dan is kind of at the head of my list, because I think what he has done with his studies and his ability to communicate the results of his studies are really transformational. They really are news to use, that take information that, for some people may be very esoteric, or it may be not in the mainstream of what they're interested in, and then correlate it with their lives in such a way that they're willing to actually start making changes in their lives that are positively impacting not only their health, but the health of their family, friends, and community. And that's what Dan Buettner's work has done. I think it has moved the needle substantially, and it continues to do so. This Blue Zones concept of people living in healthy environments, and how does that actually contribute to their genes expressing the full bright light of good health. So it's with that privilege that I want to spend a few minutes with Dan talking about this whole concept, where it came from, where it's going, how it's impactful, how it can be even more significant in the way that it affects people's lives in a positive way. So Dan Buettner, thanks so much for being with me on this short little voyage and journeying down our lives together.
I'm very happy to be here. We met at the Milken conference, and there's a lot of people interested in economic well-being. And I immediately saw you for who you were, who was a man who dedicated his life to making people better, and indeed keeping people healthy in the first place. So I see in you, and the Big Bold Health Initiative is really very much bedfellows, or I guess brothers and sisters. So I'm very happy to be here.
That's how I see it. Well, thank you. So let's jump into some questions here. We've got, fortunately, this precious 40 or so minutes together here. So the impact of your studies on Blue Zones have really made a significant impact, I believe, and your Netflix special was brilliantly done. So you've witnessed kind of the adoption of these concepts over the years since you first reported it. And how do you see this changing society? Do you see it integrating in a way that you had planned? Are you pleased with the outcome of people's understanding of the concept?
Like every overnight success, it's taken me 20 years. I think what sets this apart from other efforts is, National Geographic and the National Institutes on Aging funded us to find areas that are demographically confirmed. People are really as old as they say they are. We went through every birth certificate, followed them to death, and unlike other parts of the world where there was age fraud or people weren't as old as they were, I know that exists elsewhere, but not in the Blue Zone. So what we have in the Blue Zone is a demographically confirmed, geographically confined area where people live about 10 years longer than the rest of us. And that's at middle age. So middle age mortality will suggest an extra 10 years. And as a byproduct of that, there's, anywhere in the neighborhood of 15 times more male centenarians and up to 20 times more female centenarians than we see in the United States. Most importantly, these places are not suffering from type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, many types of cancer, probably a couple dozen types of cancer, or dementia. at anywhere near the rates. So they're not, the reason they're living a long time is because they're not dying of the avoidable diseases. So, you start thinking, I mean, when I first started, is it a diet? Or are they taking a supplement, or is there something in the water? Or is this a breed of people with better genes? Or do they have superhuman discipline and individual responsibility? And it turns out none of those. None of those are happening. So you look for something else, and that something else has been our secret sauce at not only helping individuals, but to date now over 70 communities in America live longer, better lives.
Yeah, so tell us about those 70 communities. They started with one. So this started as an N of one, but now you've been very, very successful in expanding this out to 70 communities. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's where the translation of this news really starts to have scalability.
Yes. So we started with Albert Lee, Minnesota, about 15 years ago, with 20,000 people in that town. We auditioned towns to see which ones wanted it. We didn't come in to try to sell them a diet or doing more burpees or jogging or any taking a supplement or longevity hacks. We simply went in with the core idea that if we set Americans up for success when it comes to their health ensues. In other words, I don't know, Jeff, maybe you know of some other behavioral modification effort, diets, exercise programs, supplements that have last for more than single-digit percentage of people for more than about 3 years. It just doesn't work. They're great business models because they can get people on a cycle with these things. But for our blue zones, we work with city council to optimize food policy, to optimize built environment, to get people out from behind their steering wheel on their feet, to get them connecting socially, and to get them understanding their sense of purpose so that their life has a rudder. Those are the 4 pillars. And we just, for 2 years, we went about systematically improving though, and lo and behold, healthcare costs dropped by about 40%. Life expectancy went up by almost 3 years. And they lost weight. They reported losing about 2 tons of weight as a community. And from there, we're off. And we built a business around it. It's called Blue Zones LLC. And now we're in Fort Worth, Texas, and Jacksonville, Florida, and Phoenix, Arizona. And in each case, the big hospital system and the big insurance company are funding these efforts. So these are big evidence-based organizations who do not put their money behind things that don't have a measurable outcome. And we're deploying teams of 15 to 20 people in these cities, and we're seeing BMI, or body mass index, essentially obesity rate, dropping at the population level compared to the cities that we're not in. So against controls, and it's working. And I don't know if big pharma likes us. I don't think so. Big tobacco doesn't like us. Big food doesn't like us. I'm not even sure doctors like us that much, because, once we keep people healthy in the first place, all these other business plans, getting you to get a prescription, or getting you to check into a hospital for a bed, or, I love doctors. We need doctors, but, if they're not coming in for a procedure, it's harder to make money. But the reason we're talking, and I'm a big fan of yours, is I know you guys are very preventative. You're not just waiting for a major disease to show up on your doorstep. You're trying to keep people healthy in the first place, and I salute that.
Well, thank you. You've led, I think, a lot of my thinking over the last decade plus. I've always been in search for what are the unifying features that would motivate a person to make a positive lifestyle change in such a way that they would have a demonstrable impact on their health, in terms of the felt states, in terms of the morbidity issues, in terms of longevity. And I think you illustrated it very beautifully when you said people can get into fad situations, the fad of the du jour of the moment, but it doesn't lead to stickiness. It doesn't lead to long-term outcome. It doesn't lead to behavior change. It really produces measurable benefit in health over a period of time. And when I happened onto your work, which is multifactorial, when we look at people's lifestyles, we ask the question, well, what can people do that have multifactorial impacts? It sends signals to their genes, because our genes are receptors of information, and that translates, our genes translate that information into our phenotype, how we look, act, and feel. And so when I looked at your work, I said, well, what is it within your work, when you examine these blue zone countries, these consolidated characteristics that lead people to have just their standard of living, the way they live their lives are, they're practicing good health without even knowing it. It just becomes a part of their daily routine. It's not like the fad of the moment. And it struck me that there are several features of your observations that are, I think, move the needle for people. Things that they do every day. We breathe, we move or don't move, we drink, we eat, we converse, we take in information. All those things then get processed and ultimately affect how our genes are expressing themselves into either a state of bliss or into a state of alarm. If we're getting information from the outside world that's creating alarm, then our genes pick that up. They're trained to do that, and they then create what the body's supposed to do to defend itself against risk. And that tends to be things like inflammation. So the disorders we have in 21st century living are disorders of inflammation: heart disease, dementia, cancer, diabetes, and arthritis, and so forth. And that's really the genes saying that they're trying to defend us against what they perceive as a hostile environment. The body's immune system, which is where inflammation comes from, by the way, is being on alert. And so I then said, well, if that's the case, and if I was to take what I learned from Dan Buettner and try to focus it into through my lens, which is kind of this bioscience lens, where does that ultimately lead? It leads into understanding the immune system and how it responds to things that we do every day in our daily living and in our environment. And so when I started to examine that, I found that no one's really talking about the immune system beyond that as a part of our body that defends against infection. They don't talk about the immune system as being the signaling agent along with the nervous system that is doing 24/7, 365 evaluation of how we are responding to our outside and inside environment. And that seemed like an unmet need. And so then when I went back to blue zones and started to look at what are the things that people do that we now know influence immunological function, it's all the list of things that are in blue zone characteristics. They all are signals that modulate immune system function. So I want to really champion you and celebrate you for really setting me on this journey to kind of ask the question mechanistically, is there a consolidating feature physiologically that these characteristics of blue zones impact so that it ultimately leads to the genes expressing bliss rather than expressing alarm? And I landed on the immune system. Now, it's not to say that that's the only part of the body that's being impacted, but because the immune system and the nervous system kind of cross-communicate and sit upstream of everything else, it seemed to me that these were modifiable factors that if we learn better about a person's immune and neurological systems and how it related to their lifestyles, we might be able to understand how to personalize these programs in ways that could really continue to replicate and scale this to a much bigger opportunity. So that's the Big Bold Health interconnection to the blue zones. That's how I see us interconnecting. I'm a little bit of a science geek, obviously. You're a big thinker. You're a scale thinker. You're a systems thinker, and I think the two of those do fit together. And diet is one of the principles here that it's a sheer common human experience as far as I know. I don't know anyone that doesn't eat sometimes. So then the question is, what is the information they're eating? Because that information is talking to their genes. And that's kind of where this whole story kind of evolved for me.
It's a lot to unpack there. So you're absolutely right. There's always a dance between genes and your environment. And, we know that when you follow people in Northern Africa, where people tend to have more infectious disease. It's not so clean in Northern Africa. They also have very low incidences of autoimmune disease. And then when you go to Scandinavia, a very clean and sterile environment, very low rates of infectious disease, but very high rates of autoimmune disease. So there's definitely a gene and environment conversation going, for lack of a better metaphor. And I'm sure that's what's going on in the blue zones. But, you know, I take away a few absolutes. If you look traditionally, now I know there's meat enthusiasts who, you know somebody who went to Sardinia and they're eating a lot of meat today, and they say, "Oh, that blue zones is full of crap." But if you look at the dietary surveys over the last 100 years, for most of their lives, they're eating mostly a whole food, plant-based diet. They're eating beans and grains. I know you have a very interesting Himalayan grain that you've done a good bit of research on, which I actually believe there's a there. They're eating peasant food, greens that grow in fields, and tubers like sweet potatoes. This notion that you have to be rich and shop at Whole Foods to be healthy, I don't buy it. What I do buy is beans. I know that people who are eating a cup of beans a day are living about 4 years longer than people who aren't eating beans. I do know if you live in a clean, quiet environment, you tend to be healthier. Blue zones are both clean and quiet, so those are both modifiable environments in cities. I know that people who are socially connected with healthy individuals, both in mind and body, that's a measurable contagion that tends to be long lasting, and that social environment can add or subtract 8 or so years to your life expectancy. And these are all things that we can try to convince people to remember, muster the discipline, and it doesn't work very well. But if you, as we do, we go into entire cities and we talk to every restaurant and we convince them to be 20% healthier. And we go to every employer and we convince them to be 20% healthier. And we try to get a critical mass of people to shape their homes and their social networks to get them 20% healthier. And lo and behold, after 3 or 4 years, the Gallup data shows that people do indeed get healthier. And it's not because they're trying. And there's a $85 billion anti-aging industry out there. There's another $250 billion exercise and diet industry out there that keeps selling us the same bill of goods. Meanwhile, America continues to suffer mounting chronic disease loads and costs. Obesity keeps getting worse. Life expectancy is flattened after a dip, and we're not recovered. So we're doing the same things over and over, and in the Einsteinian way, it's the whole system's insanity.
So thank you. There's so much. You talked about unpacking. That was a manifesto, what you just said there. That was unbelievable.
Stream of consciousness.
So let me go down to agriculture, from which food is produced. And I'd like to go back with you just for a second to the oldest cultivated foods that we know of on the planet. There are 2 of them that I know of that are 3,000 or more years old that have been cultivated. One is millet in the Indio continent, and the other is Tartary buckwheat, which is in the Himalayan China plateau. Those 2 foods have histories that are quite amazing because the foods were easily cultivated because they didn't need fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides. They grew in lousy soils with bad climates because those 2 foods turn out to have a genetic structure that allows them to resist the perils of nature. They are foods that actually, as they grow, can defend themselves against bugs and pests and climate and drought and hot and cold and bad soils rich in aluminum. They have genes that are capable of producing substances that help to resist those problems. And when those crops grow up and they're harvested and they're consumed by people, people eat those materials that are in those plants that were responsible for protecting that plant against hostile environments, meaning that was the plant's immune system. You're eating part of the plant's immune system when you eat those foods. And those foods then, with their unique composition, what are called phytochemicals, the materials that are in those foods, when consumed by humans, are just now being recognized to have a similar effect in humans. They improve the resilience and resistance of humans to stress and to injury and to infection. And so this is a transferable factor. The resilience genes in a food get transmitted to the resilience capabilities of the human eating that food, or the animals that ate that food, and then we ate the animals, and we got the benefit of some of that coming in the organic meat that came along the food chain. And so what we start seeing is that these cultures that had very low morbidities, longevities, didn't have modern medicine, didn't have modern pharmaceuticals, were actually eating resistance factors in their foods from the cultivars that were these ancient first foods. And if we examine them, the diets of people in the blue zones, they're not all eating millet or Tartary buckwheat, but they're eating a lot of variety of vegetables and grains and legumes that also carry some of these personality characteristics, what we call the flavonoid and polyphenol families of nutrients. And this is a major discovery about how nutrition works. I'm sharing information in this little monologue that is not decades old. It's years old in the way that people are now understanding the role that traditional foods, minimally processed, that are carried in plants, can influence then the resilience factors of humans through the process of rejuvenation and immunological function. So I think this is quite dramatic when you start looking at ethnohistory and look at paleobiology, look at things that you have been studying from a descriptive level that are now being proven for the first time ever to actually have substantive influence as we go all the way down to cell biology and start looking at how these foods communicate with a person's ability to function. So I want to, again, applaud you because it's only through your work that ultimately people like me then say, oh, hey, hold it. Can we think of what the mechanism of how these things are influencing health? Can we maximize this? Or can we find ways to really encourage getting back to regenerative agriculture of some of these lost foods, these ancient foods that actually carry these characteristics rather than the foods that were genetically modified for high yield but low nutrient content? And that's, to me, the turning point in our whole cultural evolution as it relates to our food supply. So right on, Dan Buettner. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Just a few things. Do I believe that buckwheat and millet are probably, no, do I believe they're good for it? Absolutely. In fact, the World Health Organization suggests that one of the top 3 drivers of chronic disease is low consumption of whole grains. And the fact that we're bringing these exciting whole grains with an added benefit, I think is not only a big public service, but I think it's also a business opportunity. I do think it's important, though, to send the message that to be healthy, we need to eat a lot of strains of food. It's got to be the grains and the beans, because when you put those two together, you get all the amino acids for human sustenance. In other words, a whole protein, and there's tens of thousands of polyphenols, and you want to be giving your microbiome that has about 1,000 species of bacteria. You want to feed all those species, and that requires really a lot of different types of plants. And the other thing is to think about, let's just say that I know the studies are coming that the Himalayan, is it buckwheat?
Yes, Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat. Mm-hmm.
Do I believe it's one of the healthiest foods on the planet? Probably. But the key is getting people to eat it for long enough, because usually the cycle on these things is they hear about it, there'll be a news cycle, they get really excited to order a bunch of it, They'll try to figure out how to cook it. If they can make it taste delicious, they may keep cooking it. But the secret really is to make it taste delicious. And the problem is the economics in this country are set up to favor food processors. The wheat, the soybeans, the corn syrup, the sugar cane, the rice, those are all heavily subsidized by the Farm Bill. And to come in with Tartary buckwheat, which has got no subsidies, it's going to be more expensive. And then you got to contend with the armies of food scientists who know how to take corn and make it into Doritos, which are, you can't stop eating the damn things. So you come home from work hungry and you got a sack of Tartary buckwheat or you got a bag of Doritos, and I can tell you what 95 out of 100 Americans are going to reach for. So the secret, I think, is to somehow make those that buckwheat maniacally delicious. And, as you know, I have these Blue Zones kitchen foods, and we spent about a year to make whole plant-based ingredients taste maniacally delicious. I think we've succeeded, and I know we're talking about maybe trying to get some of this buckwheat in some of our Blue Zones kitchen, which I'd be all for. So I guess the summation here is proving out, which I would say history tells us is an essential food for humans. The fact that it's been around for 5,000 years is a really important indicator. Now, given the current food environment, how do we lace it in the food environment? And that's the big question.
So I absolutely agree with you, and I think you hit you hit right on the head of the issue here, which is sensory perceptions, and we have been trained of sweet, fat, and salt as a culture, and so we are very, very centric around those taste perceptions of the variety of different tastes that one can develop. Those have been accentuated. So we have taken that as a challenge, what you just talked about, because Tartary buckwheat, because of its level of these immune active nutrients, has a certain flavor profile that is not sweet, salty, or fat. And so you might say, oh, then what do you do to get people to consume it? So you ask, what would nature do? And what nature would do is it would take a seed. By the way, this is a fruit seed, not a grain. I want to emphasize that Tartary buckwheat is not a grain. It's a fruit seed, non-gluten product. And you take that seed and you allow it to express life by germinating the seed. That's called sprouting, which we have then been studying, and you find the right kind of sprouting environment that uses the nature in that seed to produce the start of a plant, a Tartary buckwheat plant. And in so doing, as life comes out of that seed into the plant, what it does is it triples to quadruples the level of these immune active nutrients in the sprout. And ironically, it also induces enzyme activities in the sprouting process that break down some of the bitterness in the food. So now you end up with a sprout powder that is 3 to 5 times higher in these nutrient values. It has lost its bitterness, so that now a teaspoon or two is equivalent to a half a cup of flour. Now you can blend that into the diet in a multiple series of ways. It can be, it's such a small amount, it's almost like a condiment. You can be putting it in anything. So that's how we use nature to work on our side. And that's our next major development, is to have a whole range of sprouted Himalayan Tartary buckwheat products that then allow us to get the sensory to the point that people don't find it disadvantageous. They're eating this plant every day in their diet. That's how we're trying to address this.
Well, I think that's however we can get these kind of products in the American diet, I think I'm all for it. As long as they're not processed and don't come with a bunch of sugar, salt, and fat, I think it's exactly what we need. And
So let's talk. You raised this very, very important. It's kind of the topic of the moment, which is the intestinal microbiome. This rich portfolio of living critters that live in our guts, and it can be broken down really into three families. We got the symbiotic ones that do work for us. They produce vitamins, they produce trophic factors, and effectuate our immune system function. And then you got commensals. Commensals don't actually do a lot of work for us, but they don't do any harm. They occupy real estate, and they kind of are a friendly camper on our lawn of our landscape of our intestinal tract. And then the third family are the ones that we're most worried about. Those are called the parasitic bacteria. These are Clostridium and various forms of Salmonella. I mean, we know the names, Listeria and so forth, and toxigenic forms of E. coli. There's many, many of these. And so in a real healthy microbiome, a person has, in a gram of stool, has more bacteria than stars in the known universe. That's a little factoid, yeah. And of that, that's like 10 to the 13th if you're a mathematician. It's 10 with 13 zeros after it. And of those, in a healthy individual, about 10 to the 10th or 10 to the 9th are these friendly bacteria and the commensals. And only about 10 to the 3rd to 10 to the 4th are these unfriendly bacteria. So the healthy ones, the friendly ones, way outweigh the unhealthy ones. And that's where you have then a robust, healthy microbiome that's speaking to your immune system with friendship and producing positive benefit in terms of your immune and cellular function. As these class 3, or the third category, which are the toxic bacteria, grow in abundance, which they do with aging individuals in the United States, then you start to upset that balance. And now you can move into what we call dysbiosis, where you have an imbalance of the friendly with the unfriendly bacteria. And when those unfriendly bacteria start to create a little bit of havoc, what they do is they activate the immune system in your gut. And as you probably know, 2/3 of our immune system is clustered around our intestinal tract. And so when the immune system gets activated by these unfriendly bacteria, it starts to become inflamed and irritated. It alters its function. It becomes what we used to call leaky, because it now is no longer as capable of keeping things inside the intestinal tract. They start to leak across into the body proper. And this concept of dysbiosis and its relationship to the imbalance of these friendly bacteria are tied to how we eat and how we live. And we're now in a state in which people are starting to recognize that what we've been talking about since the early 80s around what's called dysbiosis is actually a very prevalent problem in our American culture.
Can you, in simple language, what is dysbiosis?
Dysbiosis means that the biological microbiota that live in our gut are no longer functional. They become dysfunctional. They become our predators rather than our friends. And so dysbiosis is associated with gut inflammation, immunological imbalance, and systemic inflammation. And it's associated with all the kind of chronic illnesses that we were discussing earlier.
And how do we keep our gut healthy in very general terms so that we don't get dysbiosis?
Yeah. So we stay away from all the things that you were talking about. Too much salt, sugar, and stay away from things that are highly over-refined, ultra-processed foods, things that don't have soluble and insoluble fibers in them, because those are food for our gut-friendly bacteria, are the soluble and insoluble fibers. Things that are devoid of these polyphenols, the very food ingredients I was talking about in tartary buckwheat that are so high. When you start eating ultra-processed foods, you don't get those in your diet. All of these are favorable foods for the friendly bacteria that create a friendly intestinal environment that then leads to lowered inflammation, lowered dysbiosis, and proper intestinal function. And a lot of people say, well, I don't really have any stomach or intestinal problems, so I don't think I'm a candidate for this. But it's not just what's happening locally, it's happening systemically. Because once you get holes in your intestinal tract, this leakiness, now stuff gets into your blood. And it goes all the organs. It goes to the liver to create NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, fatty liver disease. It goes to the brain to produce activation of the microglial cells in the brain.
What is it that's going to the liver and brain?
These inflammatory responders from your dysbiosis of your intestinal tract.
So it's essentially poop.
That's right. When your poop becomes hostile, it creates an effect on the
Hostile
whole of
poop.
your
That
body.
sounds like a cartoon. That could be huge.
So this is why in the blue zones of people eating the diets that are characteristic have all these components in these natural diets that are there to promote and sustain a healthy microbiome, which sustains a healthy immune system, because 60% of your immune system is clustered around your intestinal tract and is speaking to your intestinal microbiome.
So if we could just make it simple for people for a second. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, adding some Himalayan buckwheat to it, you're well on your way to gut health.
That's exactly right. That's 100% correct. And we can prove that with studies. It's not just conjecture. There are many, many clinical studies that we could get into here by deep drilling, which we won't, that support that model positively. People reversing all sorts of chronic illnesses as a consequence of getting their gut microbiome to be restored by eating the right food, the blue zone diet approach.
What do you think about, I interviewed this NIH neuroscientist who wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine about a feeding restrictive pattern where essentially you wake up, you don't eat breakfast, you start eating midday, you're done eating after dinner. And he asserts that when you actually let your digestive system rest, the bacteria achieve some level of equilibrium and self-repair, and that there's this autophagy, or your body starts eating damaged cells or zombie cells, and inflammation drops when you're in this sort of ketosis state, where you deplete basically the glycogens in your liver. It takes about 12 hours. And then you're burning visceral fat. What do you think about the simple plan of eating all your calories in a 6 or 8 hour window?
Well, again, I would go back to Dan Buettner's blue zones and ask, do you find in blue zones that people do a lot of snacking, that they're eating throughout the day, that they're eating late at night, they're eating early in the morning? The answer is no. They're on time-restricted feeding by the natural ways that their life is organized. And the construct is you don't need and shouldn't be eating all the time. You maybe should have a window of 8 hours a day when you're eating. That's what people did historically. They went to work, ate a big breakfast, went to work, worked hard, came home, ate a dinner early, went to bed. They didn't have snacks, and they didn't eat in between going to bed early to get up early in the morning and start the next day. So that's a 12-hour window. That's your, now we make it scientific and we call it time-restricted feeding, but that's a cultural part of blue zones historically, I believe. And yes, I believe in that, because the science actually has shown these things that you just mentioned about restoration of immune activity and kind of regeneration of cells and the things that occur by giving the body a rest. But it's a natural part of our process that we culturally got out of, particularly with all this available through food through drive-thrus, where we're eating on our laps in a speeding car. So I think that your model is exactly right.
Yeah, thank you. Well, our early humans, when they woke up, they didn't toddle over to the refrigerator and get a half a gallon of milk and some Cheerios or Captain Crunch or eggs and bacon or a smoothie. They had to be sharp and energetic and have endurance, because they had to go and find food. For the human species, Jeff, has been around for 25,000 generations. 99.8% of that, we were hunter and gatherers. We weren't, agriculture didn't come along till about 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago. And by the way, it originated in the Fertile Crescent, which is today Turkey. And the first crops, I think, were actually a precursor to wheat and lentil beans. And millet came along in Africa about 6,000 years later, and corn, beans, and squash came along in Central America about 5,000 years later. And I'm not sure where this Himalayan buckwheat, but probably very early on. But anyway, the we didn't have food first thing in the morning. We might not have eaten until midday. So I always look to evolution as a cue as to what we ought to be doing, because our bodies evolved optimizing to a certain environment, and the environment we evolved in was one of scarcity and hardship. And we live now in this environment of abundant and ease, where we're never more than 10 steps away from some rich, fatty, salty, sweet food. We live at constantly 72 degrees. We don't go anywhere without getting into our cars. We don't make social effort anymore because we're on our handheld device. And I think in general, comfort is our killer. And going back to a little bit of discomfort, maybe starting your day without food and wait till noon and be done eating at 6 or 7. It's probably evolution with success is indicate, as well as this Dr. Mark Mattson, might not be a bad way to go. And then break your fast with a big scoop of Himalayan buckwheat powder.
Well, I absolutely have the highest regard for Dr. Mark Mattson. His work in neurosciences at NIH has been pioneering, and this whole concept of longevity-based living, which really maps against your Blue Zones concept, it's a scientific explanation for what you've been discovering for years. There's one other part of this story I like just I know we've got a limited time here, I'd just like to close with and get your thoughts. And that is, you talk about resilience, and you talk about, giving the body an opportunity to refine itself by having a little adversity. I've been introducing in my own life what this thing you talked about, not eating until noon. I find it's, for my physiology, works beautifully. And so if we start talking about how that plays out in the larger system, in the planetary system, if we talk about planetary health for just a moment, all the things that we've been speaking about as it relates to humans are extrapolatable down to our planet. Our planet has an immune system. Plants have immune systems. And we are disrupting all of those systems that are there that really protect against change. They're the resilience factors upon which we depend. And so I think about our soils, which we're losing so rapidly. Our topsoils, this thin veneer of a small part of the coastal crust of the planet Earth that has the ability to support the ability for plants to grow and to fix nitrogen and fix carbon and ultimately produce proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and vitamins and minerals and all the things that we need in order to survive. And we're losing the biodiversity. We're losing soil integrity. We're losing soil mass. And it's a consequence of the kind of philosophy that's the same philosophy that we're seeing employed in medicine. Like, just go for broke until you're broken, and we'll have some way of solving it with some new intervention tool, rather than looking at how we prevent by proper nourishment of the soil. The soil has a microbiome, by the way. And the microbiome of the soil, like the microbiome in our guts, needs to be nourished properly. And when the microbiome of the soil is healthy, then the plant roots are healthy, then the plant's healthy, then we're healthy eating those plants. There's this through line that connects all of this together. And I'll just close for your comment with something that happened to me many years ago. I was invited to speak at the National Fruit Processors Association annual meeting. I think they chose me as a renegade speaker because they needed one person on the program that was not speaking to processed foods. So they chose me. And they put me at 8 o'clock in the morning after the big banquet, thinking probably no one would be there, which there were a few people there. And my opening comment was to that group, which did awaken most of the people that were there. I said, I really appreciated the opportunity to speak to this organization and thank the conveners of the meeting for their invitation. And I wanted to bring my thanks on the part of the American Pharmaceutical Association for all the hard work that the members of the American food processing industry did at low profit margins to produce the ability for the American pharmaceutical industry to be able to produce high profit margin products. And you can imagine the response I had.
Deliciously naughty. I love that.
But I don't think I'm so far off the mark as to what we're learning today.
No, you're not. I mean, but I'll just close, and I have to wrap up here. But I will say, I don't think the food processors, I don't think the pharmaceutical companies, I don't think anybody is evil. I think it's the American enterprise, this idea that you come up with an idea, you build the idea, you bring it to market, and you seek financial freedom. I don't think there's a mastermind. I just think the incentives have gotten out of alignment with what we want. We want a healthier planet, but yet we incent factory farms. We want a healthier body, or we want a healthier country, yet all the incentives are growing unhealthy food and processing them. And the pharmaceutical company sees an opportunity there in this sort of sick population to offer a quick fix. None of them are evil. They go to work, they believe in what they do. I just think our job is to help people see clearly. And then once they see clearly, help them get there. And with that, I have to go. Enjoyed talking to you. We can do it again.
On behalf of Big Bull Health, I can't thank you enough for your advocacy, your work, and we're fighting the good fight here, and I think the battle will be won by people who make these changes. So thanks, Emily. Be well.
All right, brother. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.